Here. So welcome to the final day of the 2022 Alaska Trails Conference. Excited to have you all come back. If you would take a moment to put your name, affiliation, and location into the chat. I'm going to do a brief intro and then turn it over to Emily Olson of the National Forest Foundation, where I am zooming from here in Anchorage as part of the traditional homeland of the Eklutna Dena'ina. And Alaska Trails recognizes the stewardship of the Dena'ina on whose land we live, work, and recreate. We are grateful to our conference sponsors who have enabled us to offer this event, this virtual event, free. And we're grateful for their consistent support. All four of these sponsors have been consistently supporting our Trails Conference through the years, and we are grateful. We're grateful to have your support as well. Hope to see you at some of our volunteer events with Alaska Trail Stewards this summer, and we appreciate your financial support as well. We've got a great schedule for you today, kicked off by this keynote by Emily, and then talking about volunteer crew leaders from 9:30 to 10:30, then workforce development, trail building in Southeast, and adaptive mountain bikes and associated trail construction standards. So I'll stop sharing now, Emily, and have you start sharing while I introduce you. So many of us know Emily's coworker, Patrick Shannon, who works for the National Forest Foundation, and his turf includes Alaska. But Emily has worked for the National Forest Foundation since 2014 and has over 10 years of experience in natural resource and nonprofit management in the Western US. As the Rocky Mountain Region Director for NFF, Emily leads programs and works alongside an exceptional team to enhance forest health, support sustainable recreation, and connect communities to their public lands. And as an organization, Alaska Trails, we just redid our mission statement, but just reading that sentence out loud really resonates with me. So well done, Emily and NFF. In Colorado and surrounding states, Emily's work is possible because of durable partnerships with local, state, and federal governments, nonprofits, communities, and businesses. Previously, she worked at the University of Montana Center for Natural Resources and Environmental Policy. She received a MS in Resource Conservation and a graduate certificate in Natural Resource Conflict Resolution, and a BA in Political Science and Environmental Studies. She's honored to live in Colorado and takes time whenever she can to enjoy the outdoors with her husband and two young daughters. And she is here today to tell us about the Colorado Front Range Trail Stewardship Strike Team. So welcome, Emily. We're very excited to have you. Please take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen, to everyone at Alaska Trails for hosting me and inviting me. Just what an incredible agenda over the last few days and ending with today. And I'm honored to be part of it. So thanks for having me. And yeah, it's a pleasure today to talk a little bit about the Colorado Front Range Trail Stewardship Strike Team. Was a mouthful, but a program that we're entering our third year of operating here in Colorado. So just a little bit of background. I'm glad you mentioned Patrick Shannon. And for those of you who don't know Patrick or haven't worked with the National Forest Foundation, we focus almost entirely on national forests. We really view them as the centerpiece of Americans' public lands, which of course is up for debate depending on where you live or what public land agencies you work with. And these days, a lot of our work focuses in two buckets. One is forest conservation and the other is responsible recreation. And so within responsible recreation, oftentimes we're talking about trails, trail systems, or recreation sites that involve trails. And we're really trying to promote responsible recreation and trails in a way that values the health of the communities surrounding those places. Our core values are varied, including uniting diverse interests, sustaining the health of communities, engaging Americans, restoring ecosystems, and adding value where action would otherwise not be taken. And I think this is one piece, especially as we talk about the strike team, that I want to highlight, because the NFF is not an organization to recruit its own volunteers or build its own youth corps program, we don't have crews of staff on the ground. We're oftentimes working to coordinate with other partners like Alaska Trails here and others who have that boots on the ground presence and have amazing people already in place to do work. So we try to support capacity whenever we can and to grow programs, scale up, cross boundaries, things like that. So moving to Colorado and the genesis for this program, one thing, for those of you who aren't familiar with Colorado, when we talk about the Front Range, we talk about the area from Fort Collins in northern Colorado, and sometimes people even extend that into Cheyenne, Wyoming, into southern Wyoming, south all the way to Colorado Springs or Pueblo. So even though the epicenter of this work is right around the Denver metropolitan area, because of how quickly Denver is growing, we look at that whole Front Range corridor, generally from Colorado Springs down to Colorado Springs. Sorry, from Fort Collins down to Colorado Springs. And we're experiencing a lot of the things in Colorado that I'm sure you are where you work, if you're anywhere in the Western US or beyond. So for example, conflicts from multi-use trails with people walking dogs and biking and hiking, wildlife conflicts. It's currently a huge topic of debate right now in Colorado is whether or not we need new trails, where we need recreation areas in a way that won't conflict with wildlife habitat. We have major issues with parking and congestion and just the number of people visiting trails. So both of these pictures were taken on National Forest trailheads right around Denver, less than an hour outside of the city, where there are hundreds of cars on the weekends over the summer. We've also had many natural disasters and other things that impact accessibility and access to trails, whether it's rockfall or fire closing trails over the summer, avalanche, just broken down infrastructure, signage, portals, things like that. Some more pictures of avalanche debris and other seasonal issues that we deal with here. And of course, all of this leads to many negative impacts to trails, whether it's gullying, erosion, all sorts of things. This photo is from Pikes Peak on the Pike National Forest, which is a trail that sees something like 10,000 visitors every summer. And just to put a finer point on some of the outdoor recreation issues that we're dealing with here, the population of Colorado is nearly at 6 million. The visitation is a number that's increasing every single year. 60% of the people are recreating. Most choose to recreate within 50 miles of home, which even in Denver, even though the mountains are further away than in some communities in the West, within 50 miles, you'll often hit a national forest or a national forest system trail. Colorado is also much more accessible than some other states. So as I say here, the vast majority of these 14.5 million acres of national forests are accessible by road or trail, whether you're on 4x4, a Jeep, or a mountain bike, or you're on foot, you can reach most places, which can lead to all sorts of questions and issues. And then, of course, something that everyone here probably knows well, there are fewer staff available to work on trails and recreation sites within the U.S. Forest Service and other public land agencies. So we know that there are 60% fewer Forest Service staff in the Rocky Mountain region, which includes Colorado, Wyoming, and surrounding states, and even fewer of those are available to work on trails. So all of this was coming together to basically say, we need a solution to work across the Front Range to help deal with increasing visitation, trail access, the maintenance needs, and all of these things that we're mounting. The other piece I'll just mention as a backstory is this didn't necessarily come out of nowhere. And so it builds on a history of what we've called collaborative trail stewardship here, with multiple outdoor recreation stewardship organizations and volunteer groups working together on Colorado's 14ers over the past 5 years. So NFF has also played a convening and facilitation role for something called Find Your 14er, with all of these entities, which are a mix of youth corps groups, place-based groups, volunteer organizations, and stewardship groups. Find Your 14er started in 2017 to address a lot of these same issues, but was specifically focused on 14ers. And so over the last years, we've collaboratively raised money together. We've hosted multi-organization volunteer events where 2 or 3 organizations teamed up to recruit more volunteers. We've worked on messaging and media campaigns, and ultimately just teamed up however we can to increase the pace and scale of trail work on Colorado's 14ers. Just a few pictures of some of that work in motion. So with that history and the need and everything coming together, 2020 was the year to launch the Colorado Front Range Trail Stewardship Strike Team. What we didn't know, of course, was the year that 2020 would be with the pandemic. So that was just kind of a serendipitous part of this whole thing, as we raised the money to launch the strike team in 2020. I think all of the details were finalized in December or January. And then of course the pandemic hit, which really ratcheted up the needs, made the logistics much more difficult, of course, with safety measures and protocols that summer, and just added a whole new element of uncertainty, but also of urgency and of need in 2020. So in a nutshell, the strike team is a partnership between the U.S. Forest Service, Mile High Youth Corps, and the NFF. The Forest Service and Mile High Youth Corps work with communities, so some of these trails cross into county land or state land to inform priority projects. In 2020, a 6-person youth corps crew worked for 16 weeks. We scaled that to a 9-person crew in 2021. That was largely because of COVID and the ability to have a little bit bigger crew. And this year, as we're entering season, the goal is a 9-person crew for 16 weeks. The crew works across 4 ranger districts addressing priority trail stewardship needs. So if you think about it, it's not that unique of a concept, right, to have a youth corps crew working with partners on trails. What is unique, though, and different is the length of the season and the mobility of the crew. So the fact that they work across so many different ranger districts and boundaries on kind of a responsive as needed basis to clear trails, open up access, and work on maintenance needs that season. So the roving element of this is what really made a lot of folks excited and what really has set it apart. And again, to talk about the geography, so if you look at Colorado, we're working on the Pike and San Isabel National Forests and the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forests across 4 ranger districts, with trails and projects generally spread equally across those 4 districts. I should add too that the crew is based on the South Platte Ranger District of the Pike and San Isabel National Forest. So that was just another logistical piece, was figuring out where do they start every day and where do they camp, and how can we figure that out with such a big territory. And they've been really successful. And I think what's been interesting too is thinking about all the different work that they've been able to do. Going back to this picture, just it's been trail work, but there's also been trail restoration and some fence building and sign installation and some other things above and beyond trails. So you're probably wondering how the strike team supported. We were extremely lucky the first 2 years to receive startup support from the VF Foundation, which is an outdoor gear and clothing conglomerate based in Denver. They had recently moved their headquarters to Denver and immediately looked to invest in work on national forests through a public-private partnership. They're over the brands like the North Face and Dickies and Vans, and really saw, especially with brands like the North Face, a connection to some of this work. Their funding focuses on 3 main buckets: outside matters, so conservation, environmental work; worthy work, job preparation, skill building; and free to be, which is a diversity, equity, inclusion element of the work. And we were able to hit all of that through the strike team. And I think especially the worthy work part is what they've been interested in, kind of that career pipeline that Mile High Youth Corps provides by being AmeriCorps affiliated and providing a public land corps certificate after strike team members finish their term. The U.S. Forest Service also contributed significant funding. So as I talk about a little bit later, they support a coordinator on the Forest Service side seasonally who helps coordinate all of the work with recreation staff across districts. The Forest Service also supported the National Forest Foundation with a small amount of funding to cover communications and outreach and media, which was really wonderful. So a lot of these pictures I've been sharing, and we have some videos I can put links to in the chat. Those were in large part supported by the Forest Service, just to elevate the work and make sure that we were able to spread the message about how the strike team's working. And then finally, the National Forest Foundation was able to raise some additional funding and bring some of our federal appropriated funds to the table. So it's been a great effort with lots of funding sources coming in as well for the last few years. And then of course you have to talk about accomplishments. So I'll start, I think having even though this is the kind of weedy side that's not always as exciting, having a solid challenge cost share agreement between the U.S. Forest Service and the NFF has helped so much. So we have a multi-forest agreement that allows the National Forest Foundation to subcontract with Mile High Youth Corps. We've also worked with Rocky Mountain Youth Corps through this agreement and are hoping to work with volunteer groups in the coming year. So it just streamlines everything so that each individual group doesn't have to have their own agreement. There's not as much reporting and tracking, and the NFF can help with all that. The working relationships have also been, when I think about accomplishments, just a big shift over the last few years. And then of course, with on the ground work, the strike team has worked on 15 different trails. And as the Forest Service tracks the accomplishments, the access has been improved to over 92 miles of trail. And it's just been a fabulous group of people. Here are just some photos of some of the strike team members over the last 2 years, getting to know them, seeing many of them go on to careers in public land management or Forest Service positions in trail work, or going on to pursue an educational program in the outdoors has been so inspiring and phenomenal. So the people are a big part of this. The last thing I'll share, just a few lessons learned before we move into hopefully some questions and discussion. One is the coordination needed for something like this. That photo is Glenn Ryan, who is our Forest Service coordinator on a seasonal basis. He's absolutely key just to check in. I do a bit of coordination, but he's also on the phone constantly with the rec staff from districts. He's organizing porta potties for campsites. He's making sure that the crew members have enough food, or there've been like someone sprained their ankle last season and he was dealing with that. So it's been really nice to have that coordination. We also coordinate on funding. We write grants together. We work on media and communications. We coordinate on the reporting side. So there's just a lot of that throughout. I do want to point out that sustainable funding is still difficult. It's still a project. We're still raising funding on a year-by-year basis. So it's as amazing as this strike team is, and as much as everyone wants to see it continue, we haven't cracked the nut yet of having 5 or 6 years of sustainable funding to know what's coming out ahead. So I think for all of us in this field, we know that that's always something we're working on, and the NFF included. And then finally, you may have noticed earlier that we went from 16 weeks to 22, and now we're back to 16. 22-week season was a long season for trail work, and we saw a lot of issues pop up after hitting 18, 20 weeks that season. So we've really had to kind of find the sweet spot there for what works and what doesn't. And ultimately where we've landed is at 16 weeks with a full week of vacation in the middle of the summer. We hope will help with momentum and to keep the youth corps crew from burning out. As you all know, it's hard work, and 22 weeks is a very, very long season. So we're happy with 16 and hope to continue that. All right, so I'll end there, but again, thanks for the opportunity, and would be happy to answer any questions or share any more details that folks are interested about.
Well, that's awesome, Emily, and people can see there on that last slide, strike team on YouTube. So I would encourage you to check that out. And again, we'll have these links and this whole presentation, a PDF version on our website. Please, folks, use the chat function to enter your question, but I'll start out with a couple, Emily, then. So you had the Forest Service coordinator, helping out, probably setting up the logistics or maybe scoping out the projects that the team would working on, I'm sort of assuming, but was there direct forest supervision for the crew of 6 to 9, or was somebody a crew leader and then they directed it? How did the supervising go?
Yeah, great question. So the coordinator in the first year, he actually went out to the project sites in most cases. So he'd go and camp with the crew and directly oversee the work. But there are crew leaders on the Mile High Youth Corps team. So that's something. Last year, there was one returning crew leader, which made a tremendous difference. And I think having 1 year under his belt, the returning crew leader really felt like he had a handle on the day-to-day work. So that's been great And I think this year we're going to move even more in that direction where the Forest Service coordinator will stay at the base. He might go visit one or two of the trail projects, but otherwise the Mile High Youth Corps leader will be the one in charge for on the ground work. The interesting piece has been coordination with each of the 4 ranger districts. So in some cases, the recreation staff from that ranger district also want to be out on site for part of the project or some of it, but in other cases, they just don't have the capacity and they don't have the bandwidth to be out there. So we've navigated that on a project by project basis, but part of the reason why the regional office invested and the Pike National Forest invested in this coordinator was to take some of that load off the backs of district rec staff, so they didn't feel like they had to do all of the work for the projects happening on their districts.
That makes a lot of sense, and it just seems like the right way to go. It's great that you did have a returning crew leader, which we have this year as well. I feel very grateful for that. Eric down in Ketchimak Bay asked, what kind of training do the crew leaders get and from whom?
Yeah, so the first year was tricky in 2020. That year, they did a mix of virtual and in-person training from Mile High Youth Corps and from Volunteers for Outdoor Colorado. So they did some virtual training and then some in-person SAW training. So they were a hybrid crew. We, I think, learned from that, I'll just add though, and it's all in-person training now. And the Forest Service and that coordinator is doing a lengthier 2 to 3 weeks of training before they start. So Mile High Youth Corps is still in charge of training. The U.S. Forest Service has a big chunk of that and Volunteers for Outdoor Colorado. And we're still going to be running that hybrid crew with some folks certified to run chainsaws.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit more about the Mile High Youth Corps, and is the Front Range Strike Team employees of the Mile High Youth Corps?
Yes, they are. So Mile High Youth Corps is an AmeriCorps Youth Corps organization based in Colorado, and they directly recruit and hire the strike team members. And National Forest Foundation makes a grant to Mile High Youth Corps through this agreement structure. So NFF has a Forest Service agreement. We then make a grant to Mile High Youth Corps, and then they do the recruiting and hiring of the strike team members.
Well, that sounds really smart. And so then maybe some more of just the nitty-gritty logistics, like so then the Mile High Youth Corps obviously pays them. Do they work 4 10s? Do they work every day of the week? Do they get housing? And or do they, are they kind of, I don't want to say embedded, but I mean, are they living in Forest Service housing, or they're commuting from their homes? How does all that part work?
Yeah, they're going to do a 9-day hitch schedule. The vacation week that I mentioned is something new, so that'll be built in this year as well. They do not have housing, but they base at, it's called AG Ranch on the Pike National Forest. So there's a private area for camping. So they tent camp there when they're on hitch. For some of the projects though, so the AG Ranch is based southwest of Denver. So when they're working up in Boulder, for example, they'll typically camp out at that site and spike camp. So it just depends on where the trail is, but oftentimes they're based at AG Ranch, and then Mile High Youth Corps provides a stipend and covers some things like food, and then all of the equipment and tools are provided as well. I think I answered a lot of your questions there.
Yeah, so if they work a 9-day hitch, they probably get 5-6 days off?
Yep, correct, 6.
Okay, great.
Yeah. And they, the other big piece, so these folks are typically 18 to 24, and after they finish their term of service, they receive an AmeriCorps Educational Award, which some people on here might be familiar with. So that's a nice thing to look forward to as well. After that season is they get the AmeriCorps Educational Award, and then they also get the Public Land Corps certificate, which allows them to apply, I believe it's non-competitively, for any federal land job. So that's a nice perk at the end as well.
Right. So I'm personally interested in trying to emulate, or should I say copy, this model. Has NFF been able to replicate it in other parts, or do you know if there's other similar ones doing similar things in other parts of the country?
Yeah, so last year we actually received additional support from BF Foundation to launch something similar in Southern California, 'cause that's one of
Hmm.
their other focus areas of interest. So it ended up being a little bit different, where it was a couple different youth corps organizations working to stand up these crews. But that was certainly another model. And then in Southwest Colorado, I know the Southwest Conservation Corps, which is a program of conservation legacy, they've also stood up something similar with the San Juan National Forest. Um, those are two I'm pretty familiar with, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are others who have started up similar strike teams over the last year.
Well, that's great. Just as a way to close out, we had Teresa Martinez of the Continental Divide Trail Coalition yesterday. So anyway, when you put on the 14ers thing up there, I saw Leadville, and I was trying to think of other ones, but there are communities that it goes through. And anyway, there just seems like there's obviously the Continental Divide Trail includes more than Colorado, but you all have a lot of great stuff going on down there. So we appreciate you telling us about it this morning. When does the season start? I know you're telling me that it's nice down there right now.
Yeah, we have luckily a long window, so mid-May.
Okay,
The crew members will start their training in about a week later this month, and then the season typically starts in mid-May. And it'll run through October. So yeah, we have a long window for trail work around the Front Range. But thanks for mentioning Teresa. She's just, yeah, someone I respect and admire so much, and also has been really influential in making me think about the community connections to trails, especially 14ers, and how we can make sure that the work is relevant to local communities who depend on trails and other recreational areas. So I'm sad that I missed her keynote yesterday.
yes, well, it was a good one. Yes, that recording will be on our website, but yes, she's amazing. So my final question for you before we transition to our next panel, do the four service districts, like if they're 16 weeks, do they each get 4, or is it a feeding frenzy? Do they want your crew all the time?
Yeah, it's not quite even. And we've had, this is just the stuff that happens, but there've been some different resource allocations of weeks based on, for example, the crew is on the South Platte Ranger District, so it's easiest for them to access trails in that area. And the South Platte District is also helping stand up the coordinator. So there are a little bit more attention on that district. So anyway, it hasn't been a totally even split, but we have these big coordination meetings with all 4 districts, the regional office, the Mile High Youth Corps, the NFF, where we hash a lot of that out. And it's been pretty easy, just based on the needs and the capacity needs on every district.
Great. Well, Emily, thanks again for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. And again, I'll just mention that Emily's presentation will be available on our conference website after we finish up. So hopefully sometime next week. But thanks again, Emily. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Yeah, and I'll put some links in the chat, and then
Oh, that'd be great.
let you
Yeah,
carry on.
especially the
Thanks.
YouTube one. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll check it
Sounds
out.
good.
Great. Well, thanks again to Emily Olson of the National Forest Foundation. We're going to move right into our next presentations on volunteer crew leader programs. So we've got at Alaska Trails, we have for the past couple seasons had paid crews, but we've also had a volunteer program since 2015. And our best year was in 2019, and we're hoping to get back after COVID to more and better things. But we've got 3 organizations with us for the next hour to tell us about their volunteer successes. And the first one is going to be Janae Romsberg from the Washington Trails Association. And so Janae, please go ahead and share your screen while I do your introduction here. We've had folks from WTA before. They're really a great organization that we continue to learn a lot from. And Janae is the Trails Program's Senior Manager at WTA, at the Washington Trails Association. And in this role, she oversees the organization's trail maintenance volunteer program across Washington State. and supports leadership development for both staff and volunteers. She is constantly in awe of the amazing people who donate their time to make trails safe, welcoming, and accessible to everyone. When she isn't stuck behind a computer screen, you'll find her biking, hiking, skiing, or trying to convince herself that she likes running. And that sounds very familiar to me. So thank you for being here today. We're excited to hear about WTA's Volunteer Leadership Program. Please take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. I'm really excited to be here. Greetings from an actually sunny Seattle, which is a surprise sometimes. But yeah, I'm really grateful to be here and talk about WTA's leadership program. So we'll just go ahead and dive right in. But again, I'm Janae Rumsberg. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Trails Program Senior Manager at WTA. Oh, and it is not advancing. Okay, great. So start with a little bit of history. WTA's volunteer trail maintenance program has been around for quite some time. We're approaching our 30th anniversary next year of the program, but it was started in the early 90s as an opportunity as federal budgets waned and trail maintenance backlog grew as a way of connecting hikers directly with the stewardship of the trails that they hiked on. And in that first year of the program, volunteers completed 250 hours of trail work. And last year, we've grown a lot over the last 30 years, and over 3,400 volunteers contributed to nearly 160,000 hours of trail maintenance across the state of Washington. And I will say that those numbers are a little bit down from pre-COVID levels. So in 2019, those numbers were higher. But we're creeping back up and recovering from COVID that way. And while we do have paid staff and pro crews, none of this would be possible without our volunteer leadership. And the vast majority of those hours are volunteer time. But before I get into the leadership aspect of things specifically, I wanted to give a little bit of context to how we run our work parties. We operate under the safety, fun, and work in that order mantra. And that safety piece really focuses on physical safety, but mental and emotional safety as well. We really want to make sure that everyone, that tone for the work parties are set front in our safety talk on every work party, because that's really where our volunteer leadership pipeline begins. Is that first work party, and we want to make sure that everyone's first experience at WTA is a good one. And work is last, because if people are having fun, they'll want to come back and the work will take care of itself. And so not to downplay the importance of doing quality work, but we want to make sure that people are enjoying themselves out there. And then there are 3 roles that we have on work parties. Green hats are our crew members. After 5 work parties, you get your own hard hat with your name on it. And then our orange hats are our assistant crew leaders. Our blue hats are our chief crew leaders. And the majority of those blue hats are staff, but we have some volunteer crew leaders as well out there. And then on every work party, we have a 1-to-6 leader to green hat ratio that we try to uphold. And with over 1,600 work parties, trainings, backcountry trips, all of those things, we need a lot of leaders in order to support that work. And here's a little bit of, this was from a crew leader college, one of our training weekends. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but this is a pre-COVID photo. But we have currently around 30 volunteer chief crew leaders across the state and around 200 active assistant crew leaders across the state. And when we're looking for leaders, like I said, it really starts from that first work party, and really expressing the fact that anyone can be a volunteer leader with WTA if that is something that you would like to do. And so we're looking for folks who really hold that safety, fun, and work commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That's central to all of our work at WTA. And so we want to make sure that our leaders are reflecting those same values. A desire to teach versus do. if you are a hard worker and you want to focus just on getting the work done, and that is what is fun to you, then that is great. But if you want to be a leader, you need to be able to show others how to do those great skills as well. And we want that to be fun for you as well. And then we're also looking, in order to really be able to teach, you need to kind of know the routine. And so we look for that work party experience too. We also want to know that you like it. And so we were looking for about, 25 days, but that's not a hard requirement. And then we're also looking for folks who are currently underrepresented in our crew leader community. And so representative leadership matters. We want volunteers to see themselves reflected in the leadership that we have out there. And so we look for opportunities to really mentor and support folks through their journey in becoming a leader. The actual process, and I will say that because our assistant crew leader community is our largest one, we focus most of our recruiting on that ACL pool. And then the volunteer blue hats are sort of apply and vet on a rolling basis. But we have the most formalized process around the assistant crew leader pool. And that looks like submitting an application around, we open it around mid-year each year and then keep it open for several months, during which time there's a review period. Applicants are encouraged during that time to let existing leaders know that they've applied to be a crew leader and to ask for advice, mentorship, and to put themselves in leadership positions during that time so that they can really have a chance to act as like an assistant crew leader light during that time, because at the end of our application period, we ask existing leaders for feedback on those applicants. Because of the number of work parties and how many people are out there, staff can't have personal relationships with all of these applicants. And so we really rely on the existing leadership community to provide feedback on whether or not those applicants are ready to take that step into becoming an ACL. But once you're an ACL, we offer a lot of support. I won't read through all of these trainings that we offer, but I will flag a couple of key things. We have an annual Crew Leader College weekend. That's where that photo came from. And that's really an opportunity for the entire statewide community of leaders to come together in one place and share tips and tricks that they've refined in their regions, and just a great social opportunity. We also provide leadership training for each volunteer leader, and that's a requirement. And this covers a variety of topics, just how to manage a group of people, but also training around unconscious bias, interrupting exclusionary behavior, and then also just stressing the importance of that culture of feedback that we have. That's also a core tenet of our the way that we want people to interact with each other. We also provide emergency response training for what to do when things go wrong. And then responding to feedback, we've heard from new leaders that they really would have appreciated more formalized support throughout their first year, specifically of being an assistant crew leader. So this year we're launching a mentorship program where they can be assigned a veteran leader as their touch point in case any questions come up. And then once you're a leader, we have requirements in order to stay active as a leader. That includes taking leadership and emergency response every 2 years to make sure that you stay fresh in all of those protocols. We have a core competencies agreement that basically just says, I agree to uphold these certifications as well as uphold organizational values. And then once you're a leader, you don't just get the stamp and I'm the best, I'm perfect in every way. We want to see a commitment to learning and growing, because there's always something to learn. And then we do have first aid requirements for ACLs. WIFLA is preferred, but on that last slide, we also provide wilderness first aid to leaders. And then the background check is required depending on your role, but we don't require a blanket background check for everyone. And I will say that, this is a heavy training load for volunteers. And so that's one thing that we're constantly trying to balance is providing leaders with the skills and resources that they need and we need them to know, while also being respectful of their time. And so this, COVID introducing Zoom into our worlds has really offered us a lot of good opportunities to provide some of these trainings online and fully online to kind of reduce that workload or that training load for folks. But that is something that we're, constantly having conversations about, is how do we best respect those volunteers' time? And thanks. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah, that was great. I'm just sort of amazed by all of it. Janae, thank you for sharing your presentation today and your contact information. I think I have a lot of questions, so maybe I'll just do a couple while I invite others to please use the chat function to submit their questions, or you can go ahead and raise your hand and I'll try to call on you. But so Stephen Moore, who used to be at WTA, was up here a few years ago talking about it. I remember how excited people were to get their name on a helmet, and how that was such a big thing and a motivator for everybody, which is really cool. But I was hoping you could speak a little bit more about the college, where in that big group photo was everybody at the college, and kind of what gets taught. Is it 2 or 3 days? I'm just to me, it just is a mind-blowing, amazing training, and so I'd like to hear some more, please.
Yeah, absolutely. We're actually deep in the planning for this year's. This will be our first in-person return to Crew Leader College after COVID. But yeah, so it is a 2-day training, a Saturday, Sunday, typically held in May. And it's optional for people to attend. We don't require it, but a lot of folks do. I would say that we typically have between 150 and 175 folks attend. And we we provide this as an opportunity for partner organizations to get involved as well. And we also use it as a recruiting tool also of folks who are green hats, but are interested in becoming a leader. We try to invite some of those folks to kind of see Crew Leader College and get involved that way too. But the trainings really run the gamut from, those technical trainings. We might have a rock wall building training or a rustic woodworking piece, but we also try to offer sessions like this year. We're offering Wilderness First Aid as an opportunity for folks who don't have that certification yet, crosscut, Sawyer certifications, those sort of pieces. But we really try to tailor the trainings offered. If there's any work coming up in our backcountry season that, we know we might need a deep skill set in that area or a refresher, we'll try to offer a training to really, to offer those skills. So we were told that we have a lot of punch-ins on the horizon. So we're going to have a punch-in training at Crew Leader College.
So it sounds like it adapts every year. It's not like all 175 people are taking the same thing. You might have punch-in and maybe 30, 40 do that. 30 are doing WIFA and okay.
Yeah, we have a class list and people opt in for the classes that they would like to attend.
That's awesome. And then are the instructors all WTA employees, or there's some Forest Service, some partners as well? How does that work?
It varies. It's mostly WTA staff who are teaching the trainings. We will have partner organizations sometimes come in and teach, or agency partners. We also have an incredibly deep level of expertise within our volunteers as well. And so we'll also ask volunteers to teach trainings as well. Great.
We've got a question from one of our super volunteers at Alaska Trails. Mark Spano is asking, what training is required of the assistant crew leaders if the 2-day training is optional?
Yeah, I will go back to.
Yeah, please.
If I can go back. Okay. So leadership and emergency response is required, as well as first aid training. And for ACLs, it's okay if it is just a basic first aid and CPR training, though, again, we would prefer wilderness first aid. But as far as technical training, there's no technical trainings required, just a familiarity with. That's part of that vetting process of becoming an ACL, is that you know enough in order to teach new folks.
Well, and perhaps my final question for you, but others please chime in before we switch over to our next presenter. If you could kind of set up the structure of WTA, like it's just an astounding amount of volunteers and volunteer hours. How many paid staff do you have? And then how does that shape up to the volunteer crew leaders leading volunteers? I mean, I don't want like exact numbers or hours worked or anything, but just sort of that, because to us, on the first step of, or not first step, maybe the 12th step, and you're on the 187th, but like what does that structure look like now for you all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so about 150,000 hours of that 160 is volunteer hours. So the vast majority is volunteer time. But again, most of the blue hat roles are paid staff, and I'm forgetting now how many seasonal crew leaders we tend to hire each year. But when I talk about the assistant crew leaders being the key, they really do provide the ability for us to have that amount of work done, because one staff person can lead a work party that's up to 30 people, and we are able to maintain that ratio of 1 to 6 leader to green hat because of those volunteer assistant crew leaders to provide that leadership support. So as far as and again, we do have some pro crews and those paid opportunities as well. But yeah, so I would say that the volunteer body is really the we really wouldn't be able to do what we do and have this model if it weren't for our volunteer leaders.
Great. Well, thanks again for a wonderful presentation. We really appreciate you being here today. I'm going to close down yours and just remind everybody that it'll be available. A PDF version of Janae's presentation will be available on our website. And I'm going to go ahead and invite Cody to share his screen while I introduce him. We're excited to have Cody Olson, the statewide trail maintenance manager for the Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance. Cody has worked for EMBA since 2015. Starting out in new trail construction, he took a liking to backcountry trail work and volunteer work parties after 2 years of trail building experience. His passion, for backcountry trail maintenance led to taking on the roles of statewide trail maintenance manager for EMBA. His current role consists of coordinating trail maintenance funding and volunteer hour tracking across the state, while also planning and leading weekend-long backcountry trail work parties and events. Cody has experience in volunteer coordination, grant writing, event planning, staff management, trail design, construction, and maintenance. And I really like your first slide, Cody, because I was like, where are the mountain bikes? And so it just was sort of. I apologize for an unstable internet connection. Yep. We can't hear you. That was my internet conking out. Please take it away, Cody. It should be, yep, good to go.
Okay, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Cody Olson. As he said, I am the statewide trail maintenance manager. And as you could tell by my bio, everyone at Evergreen wears a lot of different hats. We're a little bit smaller organization than the WTA, but we still get a lot done. This slide here, I'll just give a little background. This is the Alpine Baldy Trail in Skykomish, Washington. This was one of our Coolest projects, most remote. This is at about 6,000 feet, and the parking lot. So it's a huge commute to get out there. So those folks were punch camped about a mile below this, and yeah, no mountain bikes, so they were just walking into work. Let's see. So the Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance is the nation's largest statewide mountain bike organization. We focus on trail advocacy and mountain bike access to trails, and trail construction, maintenance, and side of our organization. So we provide classes for mountain biking for adults and kids alike. We have over 8,000 members who contribute nearly 30,000 volunteer hours per year, and we are spread across 8 regional chapters across the state. Our volunteer structure starts with our statewide volunteer coordinator. It's a paid full-time position. He's based out of the Seattle area. He works with our project managers and trail crew leads across the state. Depending on where the project is and what chapter, and then just kind of the budget and funding structure. Sometimes it's completely staff led, and other times it's fully led by volunteers. So that's kind of cool. We have volunteers that are leading large scale trail construction projects. So it's pretty cool to have that. And our coordinator and project managers kind of work with our staff, our trail crew staff, to identify trail work needs and opportunities. And then we partner with our volunteer crew leads to kind of get events up on the calendar, figure out people's availability. And then finally, volunteer outreach and recruitment and advertising to get as many people as possible to those work party events as possible. Our crew leader progression is typically the same for most people. The only thing that changes this is if we have someone that has a ton of background in trail work, or have worked for the Forest Service or another land management agency. But typically people just kind of get to know us by coming out to a bunch of work parties, get to know the crew, get an understanding of what our work parties are like, and then we'll usually put folks through our Evergreen Trail School, which we put on probably about 3 to 5 of those across the state each year. And it starts the 4-hour classroom session where we just kind of cover everything of trail maintenance, construction, design, safety, the tools we'll be using, land manager relations, kind of everything we can cover in classroom, we do. And then we'll identify a problem or trail project that's local to the area where the class is being held, and we'll figure out how we're gonna kind of fix that problem. And then we'll do a 4-hour work party or field session to go out and do that work. It's typically focused on trail maintenance, but if it's a class that's focused on new trail construction, we can focus the class on those skills as well. The next step is we always encourage our volunteers to get a Forest Service chainsaw certification. Evergreen has 4 trail crew paid staff that are able to certify volunteers. And that's, our most reoccurring and common trail maintenance issue is trees down on trail. And, for mountain bikes, that's a big issue. If you come around a corner and hit a tree doing 20 miles an hour, it's going to hurt really badly. So we get as many people that are capable and willing to do that as possible. Not everyone wants to run a chainsaw, so we always can use them to help the sawyers or block off the trail for safety, to keep people from riding into those areas. Then the next and probably most important step is that these folks are interested in leading volunteer work parties and providing guidance and instruction, and kind of being the go-to person for questions. And we've learned not everyone that likes to work in the woods wants to be in that leadership position. So just making sure folks are interested on both sides of the equation is super important for our crew leader positions. Once they've shown, trail building skills, and sometimes we'll send folks out with our paid staff to learn more technical skills. we will kind of go to our land managers and the rest of our trail crew staff and make sure everyone is comfortable and okay with these specific people going out and doing trail work and leading work parties with or without staff supervision. So it's kind of like everyone has to give the green light on a certain person, or they aren't going to be a crew leader. Like any volunteer organization, we have plenty of challenges. The two main challenges being volunteer retention and burnout, which are kind of the same thing. But it's always hard to keep people interested and engaged year in and year out. And sometimes it's just their schedule and availability changes. And a few other things we do just to kind of help with burnout is to, every time a crew leader comes out to a work party, we don't assign them a crew. We will put them just in one of the crews and have their own leader, so they don't always have to be the point person, and it can get pretty exhausting quickly. So we try and do that as much as possible. Another huge challenge is volunteer hour tracking. A lot of our funding sources require some kind of a volunteer match. So, we get X amount of dollars and we have to do 1,000 volunteer hours in return. So tracking those hours proves to be really difficult. We've tried computer programs, apps, we've passed around tablets at work parties, and unfortunately the only thing that seems to actually work is volunteer sign-in sheets, just a paper sign-in sheet that has prompts for every bit of information we need. And still, we estimate we probably only record and track about half of the hours that we actually are volunteer hours that are actually being performed. So trying to improve that is a huge challenge, but we're working on it. We also run into the issue of tons of volunteers and not enough leaders to take on those lesser skilled or experienced volunteers. So that's why we just are always pushing to grow our pool of volunteer crew leaders. And volunteer recognition can be a challenge too. We always kind of preach that the fruit of your labor when doing trail work is the labor itself. And hopefully that's kind of the mindset of anyone that's helping us. But sometimes folks come in and they want a little more. They want, the free t-shirts or discounts from a bike company, and we just can't always provide that. So that can definitely be a hurdle sometimes. Some of our main successes have just been growing our training and education opportunities and giving those volunteers a feeling of empowerment to take on trail projects and tasks, and just really feeling comfortable and driven to do that. We recently scored #1 in our application process for Washington State's trail maintenance grant. The main one is called the RTP grant. And that works to, we get a small amount of funding per volunteer hour we submit that can be used for purchasing tools and materials, as well as paying our paid trail staff to do more technical and difficult tasks. And that's just helped get a ton of trail work done statewide and have a little bit of money to make it happen as well. Each of our chapters has retained a small group of dedicated volunteer leaders. A lot of our chapters have people that have been there for 10 or more years, or even before they were an official chapter. So just keeping those folks engaged is super important. And we've more and more recently been doing local and bike industry company sponsored work parties where we'll have, food and drink provided, sometimes entertainment. We've had live music after a work party provided by bike companies, and it's just a great community building experience and in a way for people to get together and mingle and talk about trail work. And some of our solutions to our challenges are just continuing to improve in volunteer education and training opportunities. We'll do product testing events for our really kind of superstar volunteers that come out time and time again, where we'll let them ride on trails that are not open to the public yet. And that's a huge treat for anyone that's a mountain biker. You understand that. So that's kind of a carrot that we dangle in front of people that is super successful. We do monthly volunteer spotlights on our website and social media, and just try and make our volunteers feel as appreciated as possible. We also do a volunteer appreciation party every year where we usually take over a bike shop, we clear the floor and provide food and drink, have a bunch of people come out from across the state to mingle and talk about trail work. And we'll do a small presentation on trail projects, and then we award our outstanding volunteers from kind of each area of the state. And that's proven to be a great way to grow our volunteer community. And that is my time.
Well, that was great. I apologize for my spotty internet connection there at first. I want to invite anybody with a question to put it in the chat or raise their hand. You anticipated one of my questions, Cody, which was I was going to ask you who does the S212 or the chainsaw certification for you, but it sounds like you've got 4 folks who can do that right on staff. That's handy. So with the land managers that you work with, is it, or maybe I'll take a step back, is it mostly Forest Service land that you all work on?
It depends on the part of the state. In the Seattle area, we do a lot of work with the Washington DNR, Department of Natural Resources. They've got a ton of state forest land that we have trails on. On the rest of the state, it is a lot of Forest Service. And then we've got a little bit of BLM land that we work on, and then just county parks. We've got some work as well, but for the most part, it's DNR and Forest Service.
And are those land managers generally receptive to you all having volunteers use power equipment like chainsaws? Has that ever been an issue where they're reticent to have volunteers doing that?
It happens occasionally, like King County, which is the county Seattle's in, they allow 0 power equipment use in their parks. And we do have some pretty substantial mountain bike parks in that area. So that's a challenge. We can't go out and use chainsaws, but as far as the rest of the state goes, Forest Service chainsaw certification is pretty recognized as, you know what you're doing and you can do it safely, and that's typically not an issue.
Great. Can you let us know a little bit more about that RTP one? I mean, we applied for Rec Trails program grants up here. They typically don't allow us to apply for maintenance. So can you just, I'm glad you're number 1. Congratulations. What's kind of the formula for that?
Well, I think what got us that number 1 scoring position was the amount of volunteer hours we are able to produce for the amount of money. We are super effective. We have a pretty limited staff that's able to round up a lot of volunteer work, and we've got a lot of incredible trail crew or volunteer trail folks that are super skilled and self-motivated and go out and do work in their own small groups, and it just adds up over time. And and I mean, it's a Washington State program. It's the Recreational Trails program is the RTP. And it's just an incredible grant that we have here that we get to use and can apply for. And I mean, WTA has a RTP grant as well. It's just, we feel really lucky to have that opportunity in this state, where I know not every state has a chance like that.
Great. And then maybe similar, actually Michael's got one, our next speaker. With your mix of land managers, how do you manage insurance? Is there different needs on various agency lands, or can that be uniform?
I'm not super familiar with our insurance, but I do know that we are self-insured. We have our own insurance policy that covers all of our volunteers. Great.
And before we switch over to our last presenter, who thankfully chimed in with a question, what's similar to what I was asking Janae, what's your structure? Like, how many employees does Evergreen have, and then how does that balance out to then all your great volunteer work on the ground?
We've got about, I think we're around 8 to 10 full-time administrative staff. They're mostly based in the Seattle area, but some are kind of on the east side of the mountains, but they kind of oversee all of the chapters. And then we've got somewhere between 20 and 30 paid trail crew staff. And then that ebbs and flows as the seasons go. In the winter, or in the summer, we have way more paid staff on than we do in the winter. And then, those paid staff just kind of umbrella out to all the different volunteers we have, and each chapter kind of has its own volunteer structure of a chapter president, treasurer, kind of trail crew lead or project manager, and just, each chapter kind of has its own structure.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And when does your season start? I know much of your stuff must be at altitude, but can't imagine you're riding bikes yet, but maybe you are and doing trail work already.
Yeah, I mean, up until a year ago, I lived close to the Seattle area, and it's year round. We're doing trail work and riding bikes, and and then now I live in the Matt Howe Valley, which is just on the east side of the Cascades, and it's just starting to dry out enough that we can go out and ride. So yeah, there's not a whole lot of snow left, but still muddy in spots. But I'm getting back to work in the field next week.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, Cody. We really appreciate it. There's Cody's contact information there, and then we'll have his presentation as well posted on our website. And I'll hit stop share for him so that we can transition over to Michael DeKramer of the Pacific Crest Trail Association. Our final presenter today is Michael DeKramer, North Cascades Regional Representative of the Pacific Crest Trail Association. He has served in that position since 2017. Michael runs PCTA's northernmost regional office. He is responsible for the association's collaboration and management of the northern 400 miles of the Pacific Crest National Scenic Trail. He works on a daily basis with agency staff from 3 national forests, 2 national parks on shared priorities, including visitor use management, land conservation, and infrastructure improvements. As part of his position, Michael manages a large volunteer trail maintenance program. In 2021, volunteers contributed over 14,000 hours of their time to maintaining the PCT in the Washington Cascades. Before joining the PCTA, Michael was a professional trail builder and hiked long trails. So Michael, thanks to you as well for being here. And gosh, that's a wonderful photo to start out with. Please take it away. Oh, I think you might still be on mute.
Yeah, I
there you
had
got
just one screen, so I had the sharing and struggling.
No worries, we can hear you now.
Okay. Well, pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you for that introduction. You said my name is Michael DeKramer. I use he, him pronouns and work for the Pacific Crest Trail Association. I wanted to call out that I know both Cody and Janae. We're all Washington folks, and so it's a pleasure to go third in this panel. We have a lot of parallels to their programs. So I'll try and talk about crew leadership within the context of the Pacific Crest Trail, and where possible, maybe draw some of those parallels out for folks. So PCTA's volunteer program spans all 3 of the states the Pacific Crest Trail runs through. The PCT was one of the first 2 congressionally designated national scenic trails. Runs from Mexico to Canada. It's 2,650 miles in length. There are now 11 national scenic trails. But maybe just to start, the Pacific Crest Trail is just an absolutely wonderful recreation resource ridden by thousands of hiked by thousands and ridden by many equestrians as well each year. And it's pretty darn wonderful. So if you're on the West Coast and get a chance to experience it, I recommend taking a hike out on the mountain ranges of the West Coast. It's pretty great. I'm super biased, but it's pretty great. PCTA is the Forest Service. The Forest Service is the primary administrator of the Pacific Crest Trail. PCTA is the federal government's primary partner in the management and maintenance of the trail. A few things I want to call out. Volunteers and passionate members of the public have been key in the creation of the Pacific Crest Trail going back all the way to the 1930s. The PCTA in its current form has existed since 1992 and has grown and changed over the years. So if you're from a kind of smaller org and looking at big visions for long trails or otherwise thinking about how you can meet your goals, I think there is an interesting model and an experience to be shared from the PCT perspective. 20 years ago, we had 4 staff. We now have more than 30 plus more in the summer. And we have 6 regional offices. I lead our North Cascades office, which is our northernmost office, and manage the northern 400 miles of PCT. Key to our work is our interactions with volunteers. Our volunteer program predates having paid staff at PCTA. We have volunteer chapters that have been going strong for the last 40 years. And as we've grown and been able to support them more, things have changed, but we continue to really lean on, a strong cohort of incredibly dedicated folks, some who contribute more than 1,000 hours of their own time in a given year. So just want to kind of start with that piece. And also just acknowledge that volunteers help our organization in many ways, not just trail maintenance. I'm going to predominantly talk about trail maintenance, but they also help us with our publications, our congressional advocacy, and some of them come into our office in Sacramento and help send completion medals to people who finish hiking the whole PCT. So volunteers function throughout. I mostly work with them in terms of our volunteer maintenance. So this presentation is going to be just skewed a little bit towards that. There are just some numbers here that I think are worthwhile. Both 2020 and 2021 were down years for us, as with many organizations. COVID just presented a lot of challenges, and we couldn't run many of our programs as we would have otherwise intended. So we ran smaller crews, fewer large events, fewer big trail skills colleges and other things. But we still had, over 57,000 hours of volunteer service last year, even while managing those things. We also took in 2.8 million in donations. So, when you put in the in-kind value of that volunteer labor and also what people are donating to the PCTA, it comes to be a significant leverage for the federal government in caring for the trail. I think that 10-year total is striking. This is a successful private-public partnership, and volunteer work is a huge part of that. I already alluded to our volunteer chapters having existed in some cases before PCTA staff were around. We have 12 regional volunteer groups. There are 2 in the state of Washington, one based predominantly around the Seattle area, another down around White Pass, which is in the kind of the Goat Rocks Wilderness in central southern Washington. And then 10 more extending further south along the PCT. Some key points that I would just throw out here is that there's tremendous variation in our programs as a result of spanning such a long linear distance. Some of our volunteer groups that are based around big metropolitan areas have advantages in volunteer recruitment, and just tapping into folks who to more people to be able to get out on a trail. And so they look a little bit different than, say, our Southern Oregon Rockers chapter, which is based in kind of Medford, Oregon area, in a much more rural part of the PCT. So in Alaska, I could see similar parallels among your programs in Anchorage might be very different than in smaller communities. So those 12 groups are really foundational. They do a tremendous amount of work. PCTA staff in our 6 regional offices support those groups. But the volunteer leaders have their own structures and manage their programs and set local goals, and then we figure out how to support them. There are also PCTA staff-led projects. We have seasonal staff who run volunteer projects, and seasonal staff also work with our core crew partners. We have a major partnership with the American Conservation Experience up here in Washington. We work extensively with the Washington Conservation Corps, which is a conservation corps under the Department of Ecology for the state of Washington. So this summer, they'll be out on the trail for 8 8-day projects. And we can get into some pretty deep backcountry as a result. And then the other piece that I'd highlight about our program is that we have an individual stewardship program it's like many people have an adopt a blank sort of program to adopt a section of the PCT. And we ask those volunteers to make a multi-year commitment to scout their section and then do some of the annual maintenance on that section. Many of our trail adopters are incredibly accomplished crew leaders for us, and potentially may have cared for their section of the trail for many years. And in some places they handle all the annual maintenance and plan for reconstruction when landslides and other things happen on the trail. But it varies based on the sophistication of the regional group that they're a part of. Volunteer recruitment is a big topic. PCTA has certain advantages that may or may not be available to your group. Just some high level numbers. In a normal year, we have around 2,000 volunteers work with us. And a subset of those folks are volunteer crew leaders who lead their own projects. We have a trail skills college program that in many ways parallels the WTA's crew leader college, in which we offer up and down the trail a sequence of training events over a weekend and help increase people's skills. We have 2 classes specifically geared towards crew leaders. All of our Trail Skills College material is available on our website, and our crew leader class is called Trail Skills College 204 Crew Leadership. There's also a project management class. So we encourage our volunteer leaders to go through that sequence, but it's not available everywhere. And some places people are empowered to lead projects without a specific set of trainings. But to get back to those volunteer recruitment advantages, I just kind of throw these numbers out there. The PCTA's website is the primary clearinghouse for information on the Pacific Crest Trail, as it spans so many different land management agencies and units. So one huge perk that we have is that 1.6 million page views of our website. People come to hike the PCT from all over the world in all 50 states. People get long distance hiking permits. And many of those folks who have meaningful experience on the Pacific Crest Trail go on to be our volunteer leaders. People stay tied in, and even if only a few folks who through hike the trail, who hike from one border to the other, end up living in the state of Washington, those folks have a lifelong connection to the trail, and a few volunteers can really be incredibly instrumental in helping us get our work done. In this picture, some of those folks pictured, this is the Mount Hood chapter based in the Columbia Gorge, but some of those folks have given thousands and thousands of hours of their time. But other kind of pieces I just put out there as you're thinking about your own programs. We have a newsletter that reaches more than 10,000 people who are signed up to get that volunteer newsletter. We have another newsletter that goes to 63,000 folks who've signed up, and we occasionally highlight our projects there. And then we put our projects up on social media. And so just places to think about advertising and casting a wide net. Other piece, and Cody already kind of hit on this, but is data management is a major challenge of running a volunteer program that spans such a distance. We work with land managers up and down the trail where you can see the logos of all the folks that we have a MOU with, Forest Service, Park Service, BLM, California State Parks. But this is just a screenshot of our website, what it looks like as of today of the projects that are posted in the Cascades in my area. Folks are able to click on projects and sign up, and then they receive their job hazard analysis, their safety information that they need to review and sign as a result before they come out on their project. And then we go through kind of our tailgate safety things, but we can do some of that paperwork management that Cody was talking about in advance through this system, which is based on Salesforce. And this has been a major area of growth for us, from paper forms and a much lower volume to trying to figure out how to do the administrative work and automate processes so we can continue to grow. I would be happy to talk with folks more about that if it was helpful. But data management definitely a challenge, and then the reporting out to our agency partners is a crucial piece of our work, but sometimes underappreciated. I already kind of hit on the value of a single volunteer. I have folks who I work with who've been volunteering on the PCT for over a decade. Some of those folks through hiked in the early 2000s. And as they've gotten more time and approached retirement, they've had the ability to lead complicated projects, backcountry projects, things that require a really a high level of sophistication and knowledge. And we try and just cultivate and support those folks who want to take on crew leadership. I would just kind of really underline that if you have one really dedicated volunteer who's knowledgeable and safe, and has those terrific interpersonal skills that WTA's got such great ways of developing in their assistant crew leaders, even if you're a smaller org, that person can be just so valuable and is the public face of your organization. That person is interfacing with volunteers and getting the work done. So really appreciate those volunteer crew leaders and want to just highlight the efforts we go to support people in that regard. The last two pieces I'd like to just share is partnerships really crucial to our work. This picture is a project that we did last summer to redeck a bridge in the Alpine Lakes Wilderness. We worked with the WTA. They logged out trails earlier to help us get there. This is, some folks from a local outfitter and guide service that was coordinating with the Backcountry Horsemen of Washington to bring in 2,600 pounds worth of lumber, 9 miles into the backcountry, and then to make sure we were synchronized with the Forest Service on our plans and schedules. Takes a lot of coordination, but kind of statewide, we work with so many different ranger districts and other kind of units that it takes a lot of conversation. And that kind of brings me to the last point that I wanted to close on before taking any questions. It's just that shared stewardship is kind of the buzzword in the Forest Service right now. It takes a lot of work to have a volunteer partner scale up their work and plug in and grow. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't just underline that over the last several decades, PCTA's programs have grown most successfully in areas where they had local support from land managers, where there were strong connections. So if your organization is a place where you're trying to figure out how to grow, one thing that I have found in my role is that there are certain places where volunteers are the most efficient tool to get work done. And there are complicated, challenging projects that volunteers may not be the most efficient way to tackle that. And there may be a way to use paid staff or agency personnel. And so I think just kind of working with land managers to figure out where are you going to strategically scale your growth? How is that going to meet with your other priorities? And then it takes just a lot of conversations to make the kind of shared stewardship vision that the federal government has for a lot of its trail management, especially down here in the lower 48, at work. So wanted to just close with that thought, but let me stop sharing my screen and I welcome any questions.
That's great, Michael. Thanks. Thanks very much. It was very informative. And again, we'll have all three of our speakers' presentations on our website after the conference is over. A couple questions in the chat. One about Salesforce, and I know that WTA uses that as well. I think for smaller organizations, so they'll speak for Alaska Trails, we use Little Green Light, which allows us to track both donors and volunteers. And then we generally have been signing people up through Eventbrite. And so Salesforce seems like it's a little bit bigger for bigger organizations, but maybe other nonprofits here in Alaska. If anybody else wants to share what they use, please put that in the chat. Another couple for you, Michael. What information on each volunteer do you track with your database besides contact info and events attended? Do you have their woofer, chainsaw, S212, all that kind of stuff on there as well?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of data tracking, there are certain things that we're required to collect for the Forest Service and based on our federal grants and things, and those include age, racial and ethnic background, and veteran status, a few others. So we collect those things. They're stored on people's volunteer profiles that they create within our database, and then we can, when someone signs up for a project, we can report to that local unit, this number of folks over the age of 65 were on your project based on what is required based on grants and things. But then also for our own tracking, we have people's certifications. PCTA has our own Forest Service approved cooperator project for saw and chainsaw, training, both crosscut and chainsaw. So those records, as well as first aid and other pertinent information exist in there. And part of the automation that we have is that with our volunteer career leaders, it means that if someone signs up for the project, they also, get a breakdown, a roster that shows, if folks have SAW certifications and those other experiences. But yeah, that's all a little bit technical.
Yeah. And a question from one of our Forest Service partners: do you find that volunteers are willing and able to access all parts of the PCT, including sort of stuff that's further backcountry, or do they tend to focus on the mileage closest to the trailhead? So, are your volunteer events focused on those miles closest to the trailhead generally?
Yeah, so where volunteers are, I think, most successful and most autonomous is in areas where they can access as day projects. Once you get more than about 10 miles from a trailhead, I think it becomes very difficult for volunteers to be the most efficient tool for the job, just because mobilizing a crew into the backcountry, even for a week-long project, just requires more logistical support, more gear. And so if you break down where our volunteer hours occur, a disproportionate number of projects occur within less than 10 miles from a trailhead, but the PCT, of course, has areas that are much more remote than that. And so that's where staff-led projects, core crew partnerships, and working with agency crews, I think, becomes a more efficient way to tackle it. Though there are many volunteers, who are willing and able to take on a higher level of challenge and work in a more remote setting. But our program starts to get a little stretched once you get beyond, I would say, 10 miles from the trailhead.
That makes sense. I'm going to thank our three presenters, Janae, Cody, and Michael, again for some excellent and really thought-provoking presentations. I feel like we've got our work cut out for us to try to emulate all three of those wonderful programs, but it's really inspiring to hear such great and successful experiences and the lessons that you've learned along the way. So we really appreciate that. We hope to see you all back here at 10:45 to talk about workforce challenges here in Alaska and some solutions for workforce development and to build and maintain trails in Alaska. After lunch, we'll focus on trail building in Southeast, the lessons learned down there, and finish up with adaptive mountain bikes and associated trail construction standards. But thanks again to our presenters and to all who were able to attend this morning. And we hope to see you again soon at our at our next presentation. But thanks again to our presenters. We really appreciate it. Take care, everybody.